side here, I'm going to mix it to the back where we came in. Got it? All right. So, my name is Harley Dubois. I'm one of the founders of Burning Man, and I'm one of the creators of Black Rock City. Thank you so much. Brian Jordan described Black Rock City as the most glamorous, anarchic city on earth, dedicated purely to creativity and play. I love that statement. It's just really says so much of what it's about. Before we get going, I want to ask a question, but I'm going to flip it around. I'd like to have people raise their hands, all the people who have never been to Burning Man. Could you please raise your hands and give them up high? Lovely, you guys. Thank you so much. We have a lot of burners here. I recognize a lot of faces. Thank you for being here tonight. And for all of you newbies, I hope you enjoy this evening. Brian's book goes on to talk about how a wooden man is built in the middle of nowhere, and thousands of people get it, whatever it is, and they start to come. And he describes them as anarchists, internet millionaires, ravers, academics, hippies, gearheads, punks, and suburban parents, of which I have now become one. And again, I think that's a lovely statement about what Burning Man is and where we've been through. I love Brian's book. It's one of the few books, I have to honestly say, I read cover to cover about Burning Man, but I read cover to cover. And I have to say that I have a little bit of criticism. It's a lovely book. But I do believe that some of the female characters, female personalities, the female drivers, were not really represented in their full capacity in the book. Having noted that, I have to say it's the only book that I have read that I felt like I was there again. I felt like as I read it, I was back in that moment, and there was so much going on. There was so much to take in, and it's the only book that's ever described it for me. I actually felt like I could smell the playa dust sometimes. I don't think that Brian thought at the time that he was writing the book 9 years ago, or myself when I got involved in this, so 27 years ago, that it would ever be where it is now. And Larry is a really great visionary, and I know he had great visions for this and saw a lot further than the rest of us, but I really wonder if Larry could have conceived where we're at now. We're global. We have, let's see, we're represented in 120 different locations. We have 23 different countries that we're in. And we have over 55 affiliated events that we're engaged with. It's a global network. It's an exploding consciousness. It truly is. And I think another fascinating thing that's happening right now, an outgrowth of all of our work for 27 years, all of ours, meaning all the people in this audience, everybody that goes to Burning Man, everyone that gets it, knows that there's people around the world now who say, I'm a burner, and they've never been, and they'll never go. Because they're resonating with our ethos. They're resonating with the 10 principles. And that means we're doing something right. And that means we're doing something beautiful. And it's really grown to such a state that our infrastructure that we set up to begin with, through this crazy event in the desert, really can't handle what we need to be. So a little less than 2 years ago, we started our new nonprofit, the Burning Man Project. And that's designed to handle the capacity of a global network. We're addressing issues or concepts that you're all familiar with, like art, civic engagement, something that came with Burning Man Borders, social enterprise, being involved in downtown San Francisco. People are doing it around the world again, being involved in their communities. And a new one, burgeoning, education. We have a lot to give to people, and we're starting to share it. The Burning Man Project really is a catalyst for creating culture around the globe. In order to effectively look to our future, and really the Burning Man Project has been created in the mind's eye of at least 100 years out, we have to thoroughly understand our past. And I have to say that Brian's book is probably one of the best layman's look at where we've been and who we are in the early days. So now, you didn't come here to hear me. You came here to meet the guys that are about to talk. So Brian will be coming out shortly. I'd like to also introduce you to a very close friend of mine, a long-term friend, a co-founder, and the guy that made the first Burning Man, Larry Harvey, also known secretly on the playa, aka DJ Light. And I'd also like to introduce you to another close friend of mine, long-term colleague, our genetic programmer and our very first survivalist, Michael, also commonly known as Danger Ranger. Man, would you like to join us?
That's Larry. I'm Brian Doherty. In the middle here is Larry Harvey. That's Michael. Thank you all for coming. I'll introduce how we're going to structure this tonight. I think I'm going to read this. The book is a long one, and with the help of Leanna of Burning Man, we sort of picked out 6 small excerpts from the book, which I will read, all of which Leanna and I and Larry and Michael hoped might, while discussing the history of the event, might bring up issues that are still relevant to where the event is now. So I'll read them. Larry, Michael, and I will sort of hash over what the excerpt brings up for maybe about 10 minutes. We'll move on to the next one. We're going to try to leave about 20 minutes at the end for dialogue with y'all. And without further ado, I will begin. If not that it's a hymnal or anything, but I will, if you have the book and want to try to follow along, I'll tell you which pages these are from. And these were sort of very expertly edited by Leanna, so it's not necessarily all of it. But I'm now going to read from an excerpt from pages 46 to 49 of the book. It is discussing, initially we are jumping into the last time that the Burning Man burned in the city of San Francisco, and the reasons why it ended up moving to the Black Rock Playa. Okay. They got the man raised. The crowd was somewhere between 500 and 800 strong. Estimates by those there vary. Everyone was a bit rowdy and very eager to see a fire, the biggest one in town. They wanted the ignited arms of this man blessing the San Francisco night. Then the cops came back and wanted everyone to leave. This thing was getting too big and too ridiculous. You can't gather hundreds of people to burn a huge statue on a public beach, for goodness sake. Now, the nature of Burning Man's relationship with authorities was sealed in one of the event's most storied legends, the beach burn that didn't happen. Larry and his roommate Dan Miller, who had become one of the man's builders, decided to negotiate a deal with the police to raise the man, but not burn him. The cops said okay and left it up to Larry's own radical and individual judgment by skedaddling so they didn't have to deal with whatever ended up happening. By a strange confluence of circumstances, various people in the Burning Man's immediate family had become familiar with a very unfamiliar place, Nevada's Black Rock Desert, an enormous dry lake bed around 100 miles northeast of Reno, a vast, lifeless, cracked void. Kevin Evans, an early San Francisco Cacophony member, remembers, quote, "It seemed like a good idea to take it out there, because you could do it out there and no one would get hurt. And it would be a neat spectacle, sit around and blow stuff up." Thus, the Cacophony Society, in its rough draft newsletter number 48, the September 1990 edition, contained this event listing. Bad day at Black Rock, zone trip number 4. When? Labor Day weekend, September 1st through 3rd. Where? Black Rock Desert, Nevada. An established Cacophony tradition, the zone trip is an extended event that takes us outside of our local area of time and place. On this expedition, we shall travel to a vast, desolate, white expanse, stretching onward to the horizon in all directions, a place where you could gain nothing or lose everything, and no one would ever know. A place well beyond that which you think you understand. We will be accompanied by the Burning Man, a 40-foot-tall wooden icon, which will travel with us into the zone and there meet with destiny. This excursion is an opportunity to leave your old self and go through the cleansing fires of the trackless, pure desert. Activities will include the en route ceremony of the caravan crossing into the zone boundary. Bring with you something of symbolic value. Campsite erection in the tradition of modern Dadaistic nomadic gypsies. The construction of a brick oven for the baking of bread. A group ritual requiring your participation to raise and immolate the Burning Man. nighttime viewing of relevant desert videos on the big screen, semi-formal evening cocktail party with music, bring your favorite CDs, a visit to a local natural hot spring, and other activities as we make them up. This event is co-hosted by the Cacophony Society, the Burning Man Committee, and the Black Rock Desert Rangers. So, a caravan of cacophonists, about 80 people strong, drove east from San Francisco over the sheer but gorgeous Sierra Nevada, through Reno, and arrived in the tiny village of Gerlach around daybreak. They enjoyed breakfast and the stares at the locals at Bruno's restaurant, then went about 12 miles past town to an accessible turnoff onto the Black Rock Playa. They all got out of their cars. Michael drew a line in the Playa surface, and the cacophonists walked over it. They were in a different place now. Reality had mutated because they willed it thus. They had crossed into the zone. Woo! That list of like what was expected to happen at Burning Man is very interestingly ironic, if any of you have been there in the last 10 years. A cute little thing. So, gentlemen, you can take this wherever you want to go, but I think the question it raises is why, you know, when the cops didn't want you to do it on Baker Beach, why did you feel you had to keep going? Why go through the effort and trouble of continuing to burn the man in such a difficult, strange, hard to live in and hard to access place?
Well, I'll say something about that scene on the beach. It had been, we'd never thought about public. We'd never thought about the necessity to communicate with the crowd. Everyone was so engaged to really bearing it on their shoulders on the beach. It was that immediate. So when we confronted a group of, I don't know, yeah, perhaps 100 people, and then had to announce that we weren't going to burn it. The crowd, in short order, turned into a mob. And
torches and pitchforks.
Oh no, it wasn't nice at all. And you know, a lot of them had probably got liquored up in some bar and followed the path of least resistance and ended up on the beach. And someone actually, one guy tried to light it 3 times. And the 3rd time I lost patience. The first 2 times I, you know, reasoned him out of it. I just grabbed his coattail and then he got my jugular in a death grip and I could peel him off me. And I went home that night and it was very shocking. I went home that night. You know, it was kind of a mob scene where people of goodwill were paralyzed, the natural leaders and others rising like locusts, sensing their moment. You know, we're all ready for bold action. And I went home that night and dreamt about the burning of the Hindenburg, the Dukakis campaign. I felt kind of shattered. So we turned around and various people claim credit for it, but I think more or less simultaneously, a lot of cacophony, some cacophony people had been out to the desert. So we met with Jay Jameson, with Michael, and John Law, and decided to take it out. And in doing that, we reconstituted the original immediacy. That is to say, now it required a commitment. Just, I may say, as the selling out tickets in the last 2 years is suddenly requiring more of a commitment to just get a ticket and to hang there in the process. It does sort of people out a little bit, just as the distance and the pilgrimage to the desert did that. And so then we became a close community with this giant in our midst, and you know, the rest of this is history.
There was something that we had learned at the Cacophony Society in doing events. That was that we would separate people from a safe, easy escape. So going out to the desert, you had an aspect of pilgrimage. you had to really want to be there. And in doing so, going through that chamber, going across that line to another space, which was difficult to get to, it separated those people out from the beach who just happened to be there and had no vested interest in what we were doing, to people that had to go a long distance, had to prepare and become a part of the community, and that was very important.
I want to add that the early propaganda, the early 90s, and I don't think that's a bad word for it, like the way that Burning Man projected itself to the world, to people who might think of attending 93, 94, 95, was so intensely frightening that in 1994, the first year that I could have gone, I lived near, I was aware of it, I was scared to death. I'm like, no, I will die. The Black Rock Fire will absolutely kill me. And that was really the vibe that the messaging got across. And I learned better at 95, and I'm glad I did.
When we finally printed tickets, the ticket said, "People have died here." Of course, people have died everywhere. But they had to get it back. It's certainly not one of those.
You guys want anything to add on this point, or shall I go on to part 2? Okay. This is derived from pages 98 and 99 of the book, that's sort of talking about how Burning Man began reaching out and appealing to a particular cultural constituency relevant to this town, very relevant in the mid-90s, and still kind of running our world today. An article in Forbes declared that Burning Man was the cyberculture's de-rigger power networking retreat. Just one of those things with cyber. We're in the mid-90s here, remember. Wired, that world's flagship magazine, shaper of its thoughts and plotter of its destiny, sent science fiction writer Bruce Sterling to Burning Man in 1996, and he wrote a cover story for Wired that declared Burning Man the new American holiday. Time ran an article in 97 referring to Burning Man as the bonfire of the techies. And that same year, Wired's short-lived book publishing issued the first book about Burning Man, a coffee table picture book, because of what one of its editors, Brad Wieners, calls the fairly organic connection between the world of Wired staffers and audience and that of people likely to love Burning Man. Burning Man, the meme spread, was a physical analog of the internet, a place where every tendency, every subculture, and every idea in the world were all instantly, dazzlingly accessible. Mark Pesce, a virtual reality programming pioneer, saw the playa as the only real-world physical analog to virtual space. I get to the playa in 1995, and I see an endless plain with pointy mountains impossibly far off. That's a virtual world. If you've been in a computer role-playing game environment, that's what you would see. Everything built on it, a human construction. It's cyberspace. If you worked or thought in computer culture, business, or new media, and went to Burning Man in the mid-90s, you would run into a lot of friends. Pesce thinks that 95 was a tipping point year, when people who were supposed to be there were. In the core nucleus of the San Francisco rave and tech community, everyone went that year. Now guys, I'm wondering, did you see this happening around yourself? I mean, you guys are kind of a generation older than that, but Michael, I know you have your own connections to that industry, which we can talk about. Was it deliberate, and to what extent has that connection continued to be important to the event, if at all?
Well, briefly, I have a connection, of course, Silicon Valley. My roots here, I was involved with Fairchild Semiconductor about the beginning of the personal computer. And so I was involved with a lot of the technology that was happening, and I was involved with one of the first startup companies, Jasmine Computer System. We made hard drives for the Macintosh. So we were all hanging out a lot, and I was meeting people who were from Mondo 2000, which was the precursor of Wired magazine. And we were going to parties. I would go over to their house in Berkeley. They had connections to the Stanford Chemistry Lab, and they had drugs that had not been outlawed yet. It was flat on the edge. It was really crazy. So a lot of the connections came out of that tech industry because we knew each other and we hung out. And of course, I told them about this crazy thing.
Well, it rather startled me because I'm not a very techie, so I don't know, I had a cell phone. I'll tell you one thing was good. The cover of Wired magazine was good. It was a doctored photo. It made the man look approximately at least 10 stories tall. No, more like 50 stories tall.
Photoshop is amazing.
Yes. But it was only one of, and there have been in-migrations since. The thing to remember is that, and you can talk about the origins of Burning Man, and for some purposes, it makes sense. In another way, it's like talking about that first trickle that's farthest from the mouth of the Mississippi is the origin of the Mississippi. There have been 100% streams joining the main channel, but probably the biggest single wave that rolled over was probably on the Silicon Valley. Yeah. Did you actually expect that to happen? I know I didn't.
I didn't really expect it to happen. The whole thing didn't quite dawn on me until about 1993, and I was out on the fly and I looked at all this stuff and I said, something is happening. This is significant. That's when it hit me.
Oh, I thought that too. I just didn't know exactly what it was going to be.
Oh, I remember the moment.
Going to move on to the next one here. I'm going to preface this a little bit. When Burning Man in the mid-90s, decided to need a little more organization, the first organization that sort of took on management consisted of these two gentlemen and a man no longer with the event named John Law. Their alliance had been colloquially known as the Temple of the Three Guys, which you'll need to understand as I lead into this. John Law decided to leave the partnership for reasons that maybe we'll get into a little more, maybe not, but anyway, that's what the preface understanding is. From pages 120 to 121 of the book. After the Temple of the Three Guys crumbled, Larry created a new, larger LLC to operate the event. Because so much money had been lost when Burning Man, the notion of starting over as a non-profit made a certain sense. But the laws governing nonprofits demand a board of directors made up of people who are not involved in the day-to-day activities of running the company, disinterested overseers who can make sure the entity stays true to its mandate. For a group who saw themselves as hands-on activists with a deeply personal stake in both making Burning Man happen and experiencing it, that just wouldn't do. Who are going to be these disinterested benefactors who would make the final decisions but not do any work, Larry wondered. There were dozens of people doing important work to make Burning Man happen by then, but the first board consisted of Larry, Michael, Crimson Rose, a fire artist who first arrived in '91 and had been coordinating the actual burn of the man and the invited stage entertainment, Will Roger, a former photography professor who took up John Law's responsibilities in transportation and site management, Joe Bullock, a San Francisco event promoter, Harley Bierman, who you met, now Harley Dubois, a cacophonist attending since '91 who had been coordinating theme camps, Andy Pector, an old friend of Michael's who had become a general business wrangler for the event, Carol Morell, their lawyer, and Marion Goodell, a web designer. She took up media and government relations. Now they launched their LLC with an idea that they thought clever and in keeping with the Burning Man philosophy. Just as Black Rock City was temporary, so would be their company. It would dissolve and reform every year. This drove Andy Pector, who was handling their business negotiations, crazy. It made them seem flaky and unreliable. By 1999, Pector, Bullock, and Morell had dropped out for various reasons, and a new permanent six-person LLC was formed. Larry, Michael, Crimson Rose, Will Roger, Harley Dubois, and Marion Goodell. Going into 1997, Larry knew that their anarchistic, just come out here and do what thou wilt model had to change if the Burning Man ritual was to survive. Unbridled liberty and fire arts were no longer going to be the main selling points. Larry, we believed it was a community. We knew people were feeling it to be such, but there wasn't a social framework to fully shape Burning Man around that idea. We decided to build a vessel to contain a community, Larry said. We realized we had to create a real city. If you look at the Burning Man newsletter in 1997, it's one big propaganda sheet for community. That's when the litany began. Community, community, we're community. And people grabbed onto it. Now, I think there's a lot of issues about today that this brings up, one of which is you guys are in the process of trying to transfer the ownership of the event to a nonprofit, despite not thinking that was the best way to go in the beginning. I'm wondering what has changed since then to lead you to want to go in that direction. And I think another thing this brings up is, why did you feel that Burning Man needed to adopt a set of ideas? And in 2003, we were just talking about community, but since then, of course, there are 10 principles that have evolved, which you guys pushed forward as shaping the event. And I'm wondering why you thought that was necessary or something the community had to do to survive.
Well, at the time, there were really very few of us to even, start an LLC. And we didn't know who we could trust to carry this thing on. There wasn't a much larger circle. And now, everybody in the world's a partner, so there's a lot more people we can trust.
Well, I can tell you what's changed. The chief thing that's changed now, to be blunt about it, certainly Michael and I share this, is that it's really easy for us to foresee our deaths. But that's good. You reach a certain point in life, and now we're all thinking of what happens after we're dead. That is, the legacy, you want to regard that way. And it's oddly, it makes you giddy, it's oddly liberating. It takes your ego out of it entirely. And it's more easy to live in the present and work in the present in an intense way. But the question became, the obvious question soon became, what happens then, what indeed happens after we're dead? Who does it go to? It's property. We own it. It goes to our heirs and assigns. Oh, I don't think so. I really don't. And then to be like the heirs of 6 different people, that couldn't possibly. And, so then we had to, basically that's the primary perception, I think, that led us to the expedient of decommodifying, as it were, to transfer the property to a nonprofit, and the challenge of that, which we're right in the middle of, is then how to assure that nonprofit will retain all the soul that went into the making of Burning Man in the first place. And nonprofits sound benign, but believe me, there's as much struggle for power and as much ego in the politics of nonprofits as in anything else. Maybe more so, because in a profit-making enterprise, these should be disciplined by the marketplace. So that's absolutely fascinating. We have to create a nonprofit that's unlike nonprofits. That is to say, that has the that will manifest the values that it wants to advance in the world. It has to be what it wants to produce. It can't just be a means to an end. That means it has to be a nonprofit remarkably free of the bureaucracy and the kind of, it's one thing to have a board. I don't want to have, we've got a good board, but when you take material interest out of it and you have a board, then there's great potential for it to just be about the exercise of power. And this is a great challenge, because we said we want it to last to the next generation, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. You're talking about 100 years. This is the most interesting work. I think this is the most interesting work I've ever done.
Really, the challenge is to create an entity, a thing, comprised of a group of people, a community, that's unlike what's been created before. That's really a challenge.
Well, we've been in existence 27 years, and we've defined we defied expectations. That is, we've transcended the so-called law of pop culture of entropy. And Okay, that's a good span, but now we're talking about 20 years, and we're talking about a thing reproducing itself and then reproducing itself. And the cultures are able to do that. So we have to turn the organization that advances this cause into a community and a culture of itself. And there we're on ground that mostly is not confronted in our world. So I think we're doing the most original work we've done.
We're evolving an entirely new creature.
I want to push a little on the principles question. Is it your belief, do you think the event could have sustained and still been roughly what it is without the more deliberate shaping of what it means that the 10 principles provide?
Well, the fact of the matter is, the principles weren't written until 2004. I just recently gave a talk in which I said, when I wrote them, I actually performed a thought experiment and went back to the beach and asked myself, in the writing of them, were these present there at the beach? And almost to my surprise, I could describe them. I could see that they were just inherent in the immediate actions and experience that we had. But none of that was premeditated. They were created in 2004 because people had left the event and they were trying to reproduce it wherever they might live. And for that, but it was hard for them to do that without the customs and the culture and of Black Rock City around them. And there was actually a great desire for some sort of document that would describe the values that everyone might feel they shared. And when those were published, our community as a whole doesn't really like central authority. But remarkably, when they were published, the people out there in this dispersed community inhaled them as if by one breath. They fit there and kneaded them like polished ivory to the palm. And so that's an argument for their authenticity. But people should never forget that the last principle, immediacy, and it describes kinds of immediacy, and it says that no idea should ever substitute for immediate experience. So so let's never reify them and think that they all came from the principles. Nobody ever came to Burning Man because of the 10 principles. I mean, I really doubt that. But when they want to recreate it in themselves and with others and to do things in the world, that's when the call arose for it. And they've proven so very useful for people in their attempts to organize with others and do things. And in such a way that it seems to embody a way of life. And the test should be empirical, it should be pragmatic, and they're really useful so far. So, though they aren't commandments, I think we wrap that whole nonprofit around the 10 principles. That's its simple mission, to take that description and then find it or create it in the world. That's what we're about.
You think to that, Michael?
I think that covers it pretty well.
That's a great intro to the next segment I'm going to read. It will help to remember that this book was sort of reported and researched in, from '99 to 2003, written in 2003, published in 2004. So if some of the words of the book sound naive, be aware that it's from a decade ago perspective. So this next quote from pages 262 to 268 discusses the early beginnings of the regional network, which ties right into what Larry was just saying. So, what do you do after your decision to build a little scrap skeleton and burn it on the beach transmogrifies over the course of less than 2 decades into a nearly $6 million culture business, selling that most ephemeral of commodities, community, and gathering tens of thousands of people at hundreds of dollars a head to perhaps the most unpleasant, punishing environment imaginable? Now, Larry Harvey is serious about changing the world with this, and has been from the beginning, when even uttering that thought seemed absurd. But with the current number of devotees and their enthusiasm, their energy, and their dedication to the idea of Burning Man, it sounds less ridiculous. Now it's time to franchise. Now Larry rejects that language, of course. To him, the new plan they are embarking on is more along Freemasonic lines, an interconnected system of lodges of fellow world-changing conspirators, than a McDonald's model, a worldwide squad of cookie-cutter duplicates. For several years now, again, it's 2003, Burning Man enthusiasts have been throwing smaller Burning Man-style events in their own towns, from Texas to Maryland to Hawaii to Arizona. They'll find some out-of-the-way land, usually private, gather, celebrate, make things, usually not on as grand a scale as a Burning Man, and usually burn something as a central ritual. To the people organizing such events, known as regional burns, these attempts to reproduce aspects of the experience that so energizes them, to pass on that gift to others who, for whatever reason, might never make it to the Black Rock Desert, are extremely valuable. Now, I've been to the biggest, at the time, of these regional burns, Austin Flipside, for 3 years straight. And while it's a blast and I have a great time, I found it lacking in awe and transformation, mostly because of the pleasant, comforting environment. It happened in a grassy meadow with a swimmable stream running through and an outdoor swimming pool and a handful of actual toilets in addition to the porta johns. Now, I think Larry underestimates the importance of the setting when considering why the Burning Man experience grips people so. The Black Rock Playa adds a sense of adventure, the sense of crisis that Larry has elsewhere recognized as the key to community. It doesn't come from kumbaya, he has said. It comes from a unified, joint struggle to survive. With that said, I think I still believe what I said there. I think that the environment of the Black Rock Playa is super key to the experience of Burning Man in a way that I've never found reproducible. I don't know if you guys agree or not. And with 10 years perspective on the regional model, you know, how do you think it has worked?
Well, I felt for a long time that I do think that there will always be something special about that existential context. But over the years, I've also been equally impressed by the phenomenon whereby people interject the ethos and carry it with them. I think it's portable. Of course, there are some. There's one in Spain, in a very wild setting, and there's one in South Africa, the largest gastronomic event, which is probably harder to get to than. And there's one in Australia that are very difficult to get to, and they certainly maintain that. But you know, I'm interested not just in events. We actually think what we think we can create is you know, what do we do in the desert? We create a kind of platform, and then people come and they supply the apps. They can supply the applications. We don't do that. They bring the content. And we have found, and I've heard so many stories now, how people in the scale of their block or within their family or in the context of their career, in some way have applied those values to the way they lead their life all of the time. And you know, I think that the event of the desert, for a good while yet, will remain as, you know, as a kind of Paris, you know, as a capital, as a cosmopolitan center, which is very stirring because people come from all over the world, and that's inspiring in itself. But our ultimate, you know, we're interested in immersive events around the world, and they've already begun to form. So it's hard to. That's evidence that it's hard to deny. It's hard to deny, but we only are interested in those kinds of experiences because basically the vision is to finally that they too diaspora will extend out from them, and then pretty soon it will penetrate every crack and cranny. And at that point, if Burning Man's known everywhere around the world, I mean, it's remarkable, it's stupid, it's silly, but if that's a powerful force, so about 50 all around the world. And what does that do? Well, then you're talking about an effect that's at a global scale. And then you're talking about people who might not even come to any Burning Man event, but who have absorbed a set of values, a way of living that could be applied by them in a unique way anywhere they might be.
I've looked at the Burning Man experience and often wondered, what is it that happens that changes people's lives? And we're exploring that, the idea of immersive experiences in the regions. And there's an area that I'm pushing even further into the future, that of virtual worlds. One of the projects that I'm involved with right now is trying to translate the Burning Man experience into a three-dimensional virtual world where you could sit at a keyboard, as it were, and get some of that experience. Maybe not to the extent that you'll have it in the desert, but I have found that it is a little bit translatable. And in doing so, you can reach a lot more people. The events that we've been doing, and we have an annual event called Burn 2 that's done in the virtual world. And there are people that have come away from that experience saying, I've never experienced anything like it. So there are mechanisms that you can have some effect to make that life change like you do on the planet.
Besides which, we're forming a committee, and I invite any of you to get involved. We want to transplant an event in Antarctica. If you think the Black Rock Desert is transplanted, that's just for rooms. So get in touch with the organization. We'll need a lot of help.
Thank you. We're going to get into some big idea stuff with this next selection, which is super condensed from a very long discussion on pages 236 through 244 of the book. Now, some of the original desert cacophonists don't go to Burning Man anymore. Not so much because they resent the rules, but because they are unhappy with the reason the new rules are there. Because Burning Man's ever-growing population makes it impossible to actually trust everyone around you. The organizers worry about safety, of course, for obvious and admirable human feelings of responsibility for the people they invited to the party, as well as legal liability. But safety is especially tricky in a Burning Man context, because the nature of the event invites and demands behaviors that are not safe by most normal standards. Fire play, amateur constructions with no building codes imposed, the attempt to live in a place prone to nearly 100-mile-per-hour winds and dust storms. Sure, safety first and all, but as Michael asks, what are the real reasons we seek safety? Why are we so concerned with prolonging our lives? To what end and for how many years? What about quality of life? What is being alive? What is living? Now, there's a chance you may die at Burning Man, but you will never be more alive. Now, Michael, I know. Well, I will let Michael react to that himself, or expand, and how is that set of ideas meshed with how Burning Man has grown and evolved in the decades since we had that conversation?
Well, first of all, we largely lead very cushioned, protected lives. And we're protected by the government. We're protected by the rules. And the whole idea is to protect us, I think, so that we can be good consumers. But in doing so, people are not really experiencing being alive, not getting an opportunity to take a chance, take a risk. And that, by and large, is what we're lacking in this era. And Burning Man enables people to go out and play with fire, blow shit up, and take risk. And you can be more alive if you choose to take those risks. You're not living if somebody else is protecting you. Don't do this. We have rules against this. a safety thing on every extension cord now, which is really ridiculous. So my point of view is that we should be able to make some decisions about how we live and how we can take risk on our own and decide for ourselves if we want to take those risks.
You know, we have always held, I think this is your saying, that you have a right to hurt yourself. Now, speaking as a civic organizer, early on, the Black Rock Rangers were formed because we realized we were putting people out into a potentially very hostile place. And it was even hard to find our little settlement for years. You're lucky if you found Black Rock City. And so what we were doing is extending the invitation to come on out. And as a result of our invitation, people got stuck at the edge of that playa and died. And you can rather quickly, at the rate that the heat wicks the water right out of you. And Michael founded the Black Rock Rangers because we did feel responsible. If we created, if we invited them, you know, if you invited somebody to join you at the tar pits, you know, and they fell into a pit of boiling tar, you'd feel bad about it. And I think you have to shoulder some responsibility for that, you know, but
teach them to bring a rope to pull themselves out of it.
But you know, I can argue on the other side. I do think that we're overprotected. I don't like. I drive a Jeep because one reason I do is because it doesn't tell me to buckle my seatbelt. I'll buckle my seatbelt if I choose to, and I do choose to. But I don't. I mean, it looks to me like a little embassy of the nanny state, you know. We become a risk-averse society in a way that isn't good. The interesting thing, though, is oftentimes people will say, well, you did all those things to protect people because you're afraid of getting sued. And here's one remarkable fact. We haven't been sued a whole lot. And every year people will, now, we have safety standards for artists when they build things. We have to inspect structures. That's just a fundamentally moral position. But if you build a city, then you shouldn't create hazards that people couldn't anticipate. But we've hardly been sued at all because people know that they have to be vigilant, they have to be aware, they have to take responsibility for themselves, and also if having injured themselves because of their own negligence, if they sue us, they'll lose most of their friends. So that's actually a workable system.
I want to ask Larry something, because I think one of the great things about the event is a bunch of different mentalities shape it. And of course, that quote was from Michael, and it's from a chapter in the book titled, quote, "You can burn your own car," unquote, which is another quote from Michael. The follow-up is, "As long as you clean it up." And in fact, in 1996, I saw someone burn their own car. I don't know if they cleaned it up or not. I hope they did. I always got the impression, Larry, and I don't know if we've directly talked about this, that was never the part of this that, you know, made your spirit sing. Like, you don't necessarily and maybe I'm wrong. Do you, you know, seeing big dangerous fires, sort of the mid-90s, and people running through like LA Cacophony, burning a bunch of effigies and running through the live fire and kicking things, like, is that sort of thing of interest to you? And if not so much, what do you think of seeing that kind of stuff accrete around the concept you had?
Well, listen, in 1996, I was awakened early in the morning by a ranger who informed me that someone had driven, we didn't have a street system, and a techno camp, and our then solution to the problem with the loud noise was just to move them a mile away. And it sounded like a good idea, except that the organizer of that event, then left. And so this was not well regulated at all with any thought to safety, and someone had at high speed had driven right through a tent and over somebody's head. Man, would be the same here. And an experience like that you never forget. If you've got any sense of moral responsibility, any heart about the matter, you have to do something about it. And that's why in 1997, when we moved to the Wallapai Valley, we actually created a street grid. We actually had boundaries. We were actually able to get people out of their cars and remedy all those things that made that possible. And today in our city, we have emergency response rates that would be the envy of any city besides. And that goes all the way back. Civic responsibility, it goes all the way back to the beach. I even figured that out recently. When we couldn't burn that man, there was an argument in our midst about that Dan and I did a deal with the ranger who was there, and we said, okay, we won't burn it. And then he more or less ran away. And some people said, well, okay, let's burn it. And we give it our word. We couldn't. Well, we had to honor that. And also in some corner of my mind, I guess, I was thinking, I was raised that way, but I was thinking, if we do this now and break our word, what does that say for our... Well, we took it to the desert, and since then we've learned to deal with the federal government and interface with the authorities, and we didn't have a rap sheet dogging us because we played one last little guerrilla trick and put our thumb in their eye and flaunted their authority. And so civic responsibility was even present in the midst of that riot on the beach that we fled that drove us out to the Black Rock Desert. So to me, that way of looking at it wasn't, I never thought it was some sort of piratical task. American band of pirate pranksters. It really wasn't my cup of tea. It was some people's, but in the end, the argument that won the day, I'll just say that, was the idea of a city in which people, in which it wasn't just a bunch of cliques and anarchistic bands who all talked about one another around their campfires, and it was an approach game rule. I was there. I don't romance that history. I was there and I saw what it was about to turn into if we didn't make it civil. But that was an argument. People, I've even heard about people in these latter days saying, what can we all do? Let's organize and have meetings so we can make Burning Man more dangerous. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And you can bet that the people who go on and on, bragging about danger this and danger that, as soon as someone gets hurt, it'll just be like the kids behaved when I was a kid. We have dirt clod fights, and they go on until somebody got one in the eye, and then everybody would run home. You know, and no one would take responsibility for anything. That's childish. So, I mean, it's a, listen, there's plenty of, you know, you can hurt yourself at Burning Man, and I think that's just fine. But no, I really do. If they're like, you know, that slide the guys from New York had out there with the AstroTurf, I mean, somebody.
We got so many calls on that.
and there are people who just got hyped. I mean, and I know some of them, and not one of them that I know of blamed anybody for it, and it wasn't going to kill you, but it. And I don't see anything wrong with contact with nature in that fashion. It's just fine. But you know, a dust storm comes in, and it's really scary. You think the world's ending, but actually it's really safe. It's a soft surface and it's not going to kill you. It just feels like the world is ending. And people want to have experiences like that on a regular basis.
The city idea brings up this question that I want to ask. Of course, now that you are a city in the world of politics, you're a city engaged in relations with other cities, other political entities, Washoe County, Pershing County, the federal government. One way into this, I want to ask you, do you guys feel that the sort of structure of, let's not even call it rules, the structure of sensible decisions about how to operate that have allowed Burning Man to stay alive, do you think that they mostly were and mostly could have been self-generated, or have there been examples where butting against these other authorities have been a positive thing for you guys? And then maybe talk a little bit about your current conflict with Pershing County.
We've learned a lot from interfacing with the authorities. Funny thing is, we went out to the desert to do an inherently otherworldly thing. We left the world behind. But in order to survive out there, we had to deal with three different jurisdictions of government: county, state, and federal. We lobby DC. We've written bills at the federal and state level. You're not supposed to say that, but we have. And it's been a crash course in politics, economics, all the worldly values in order to stay out there and do what we're doing. I don't regret one instant of it. It's been the last great installment of my higher education. It's absolutely fascinating. Did you ask Pershing County? Did you ask about Pershing County? Oh, well, we're all going to be friends.
Is the conflict over? Yeah, I actually...
Not wholly, but a bill was passed in the state legislature about it. That was in some way favorable to our interests. And I think that there's still a civil case pending. I expect that we'll all decide that it was just a misunderstanding.
I hope so. Michael, do you feel the event has benefited in any way from the reality check of dealing with these other entities that feel they have a bit of a say in what might go on?
Actually, what I think is the reality check has kind of been on the other side. It's like a culture clash. There's competing ideas of culture and how you should be and conduct yourself. And we run up against their culture. And it's often a very rigid way of thinking. But in doing so, it gives us a chance to kind of educate them, to realize that we are indeed a community and we have rights to exist. And we have our own standards, and that should be respected. And we've done a lot to teach them what our standards are. And so it's working out.
We learned some things early. When we went to Walleye Valley, it became clear to us there is a reason you have street signs. Because it's not enough to say someone's having a heart attack near the red car next to the inflated, elephant. That's not good enough. And so we did learn a lot about civics, and we've had profited somewhat, but to be perfectly candid, we're in some ways the opposite of a bureaucracy. The bureaucracies tend to be support a very insular way of thinking. But it teaches how that we can all get along. There's hope for the world.
Thanks. The last reading is going to be basically on the theme of the sort of hows and whys of how art in a Burning Man context affects people. And it's talking about a piece that was at Burning Man in the early aughts called Hearth, which was, for context, a sort of, I think, probably 15-foot tall metal sculpture in the shape of a heart that was filled with wood and burnt every night. The guy who made it is named Charlie Smith. I've worked with him many, many years, and he continues to bring work to Burning Man on the same theme of hollow metal sculptures filled with wood and burned. Okay, this is derived from page 200 and 201 of the book. Hearth began in its planning as a 10-foot propane-fed piece. But by the time the artists were done, it was almost 20-foot tall wood-burning one, made of steel and set in a large tray to catch the ashes. Large-scale fabrication for Burning Man is always an experimental process. There are no blueprints from experts or previous experience to guide you. That's a little less true now, by the way, but it was pretty true back then. Their piece represented the heart within 2000's art theme, which was the body. They called their sculpture Hearth, the place where heart meets earth. On one level, they saw it as a strictly practical gift to the people of Black Rock City. Sid Kling, one of the creators, remembered that in 1999, an especially cold year at Black Rock, it was very hard to find warmth on frigid nights on the open playa. By 1999 at Burning Man, there were no more open campfires allowed because of concerns about damage to the playa surface and the fires going wild in the increasingly dense campsite. Only contained burns in burn barrels and planned art burns were allowed. So a sculpture that also gave off sustaining heat seemed like a lovely idea. Indeed, Hearth's pulsing, sweet, hot metal glow drew thousands, moth-like, wandering toward it through the Black Rock night. It was beautiful is what it was, both the object and the experience that grew around the object. Making it do its thing required the help of anyone around. Charlie Smith and Sid Kling themselves touched every log in 12 cords of wood at least 3 times, off the delivery truck, onto their van, out of their van and into the hearth. And lines of friends and strangers would gather every night around sunset to offload and toss wood through Hearth's hinge door, whimsically naming each log as it slammed into Hearth's insides. The herky-jerky booming percussion of log slam on metal became a wild music, and that shared labor, even in play, really does build community ties. It was almost like a mass, the logs of sacrifice releasing their energy, their stored life to the succor of humans. This piece allowed for no cynicism, really. It warmed all who came to it, and the rough, weathered metal skin glowed and bulged and aged and warped before our eyes, and the raw reality of that, and of the ancient truths of gods like Hephaestus, and how much Charlie started to remind you of Hephaestus, really, when you thought about it, and their gift to mankind. Well, it was not something you'd experience in an average visit to a city park. As Charlie, who stood watch till dawn every night, a household god guarding his hearth, said, watching people, watching strangers fall in love, watching people smile in that radiant heat. I never knew it could do that. How could I build such a crazy gift? Now, thanks. That touches on something, I think, to the heart of the question Michael asked earlier and asked a lot. Like, what is it? Why does Burning Man do what it does to people? I'm wondering, sort of riffing off that, if you feel in the decades of doing this, if you are any closer to an answer to that question, like, why does Burning Man work? And I think that is sort of an example of how and why it does.
Well, there's certainly that primitive fire that draws people.
Can I tell a story that's at least related to that? I was one year at the I drove out to the van on my golf cart and ran into a near whiteout. And so I stopped the cart, stepped out, and there, very near at hand, was an individual who was squatting on the ground. I think he had a boombox. Might have had a little lamp in his cap, I'm not sure, but he was murmuring, rumbling, and some kind of incantatory performance, and then I realized he was actually eating aloud, and then it really got my attention because I wanted to hear the word Burning Man. I thought I heard my name, and it was Brian. He was reading that book aloud, and which was difficult because every 2 minutes or so he looked like this. and then he had to clean the glasses and then you put them back on. I don't know, 15, 20 minutes watching this. I didn't want to interrupt. And finally left him there. And later on I saw you. I said, how far did you get in the book? I think he said, oh, I don't know. It was about 2 hours. He said, I saw you there. It was about 2 hours later. And how far did you get in the book?
I think around page 80. I had the idea that I wanted to read this entire book aloud at Burning Man. And I picked a night. It had to be that night. And there happened to be a dust run that night. And I just, okay, this is the night I'm going to do it. And the reason I stopped, the person who talked sense into me, and if you know this man, you'll find this funny, I think, and if you read the book, you'll kind of get to know him. A guy named Flash, a very old friend of Larry's, has circled the Burning Man bill for years. Flash actually told me, like, you're killing yourself, buddy, come on, you don't got to do this. And so Flash convinced me that I didn't need to actually carry myself through on that, and I stopped. I regret stopping, actually. It would have been cool to have said I did it. I don't know if it's physically possible. It might have been. You know, I'll never know, I guess.
So why did you do that?
Why did I do that? I don't know. I mean, it seemed like an excessive, interesting stunt, and push myself, and hopefully it would be, and obviously no one's going to listen to it for more than 20 minutes, but hopefully it's a thing that as people wander by, they'll stop in and listen a bit, and hopefully be amused, and yeah, it seemed like a good thing to do. Michael, do you have anything to add?
I've seen things you wouldn't believe.
We are now ready to open this up to dialogue with y'all at this point. Our prepared show is over, and I think we have a good, I think we even beat more than 20 minutes, I think, a little more than 20 minutes to talk with y'all. And we didn't, because the idea of opening up to talk was something that the three of us just came up with at the end. We do not have the normal setup of like a mic in the crowd, so we're going to have to do this a little bit chaotically. But if anyone wants to raise their hand, or I can actually see you now. I see a hand right there.
There was one thing you could go back and change. Is there something that you would change? You could?
About their lives in general, or the running of Burning Man?
I don't like to see that.
We might have learned things faster.
Yeah,
It's a zigzagged path of learning.
Yeah, although that's kind of vital because everything is so contingent. We might make one constructive change, but I mean, your progress in life is irrational for the most part. It shouldn't be. And be it's like an old car I had. I never took care of it, and it lasted, and it lasted, and it lasted. The only thing I would do is put mica in the radiator until the kind of process of fossilization, and the whole radiator is made of mica bricks. And finally, I was afraid to change anything because I thought if I did that, I would disturb the dynamic equilibrium that had evolved in that machine to make it to me like a being. And I'd be afraid to change anything. No one's asked that question ever. Yeah, I can think of a lot of dumb things, of course, that might have been done better, but I don't know. I don't think you can run time in reverse. Yeah, there are plenty of dumb things, but one doesn't want to talk about them ordinarily. Anyone?
Yeah, front row middle.
So I've always thought that getting economy is the central most important massive burning man. I was really pretty talking about that. And I also, think that the gift economy is something that does happen in other crowd situations I've been in Central Park in New York, concerts, where everybody's setting out their picnic. Suddenly people are, exchanging salt and pepper and handing a bottle of wine.
Well, I think it's something that it's kind of been forgotten to a large extent in our culture.
More or less, she asked about the significance of the gift economy to the Burning Man experience, and she posited that she considered it very central. We haven't brought it up yet tonight, wants to know how important we think it is. Go, Michael.
Well, I think it is very essential. If you read the 10 principles, actually there's an argument between the principles. It actually takes the idea of a gift in one principle and advances it through another perspective into the next, and then introduces, it says, radical self-expression. It originates in the individual, but it's a gift to others, and because it's a gift, it should be taken in a form that people can accept, that it might conceivably be, be acceptable. It just grew up naturally. People don't realize there is a gift you can't economy. It exists in families, at least good ones. You don't go to have a family picnic and charge Granny for a weenie. That's wrong.
And out there we have a very large family.
So that it's not such a novel idea. We just automatically do that within families. We just said let's try and experiment and apply it at a civic level, and see what the whole world is like if you go without advertising and without promotions and hype, and at the same time declare that all exchanges that there are no commercial exchanges that contemplate a return, but gifts. And everyone knows, again, little children know, 4-year-olds know that gifts are unconditional. They know that. If you love them well, you love them unconditionally. Everybody knows that, except some too often we forget. So I think it's at the very heart of what we do. I think it's in a way the most original thing we did. It happened organically. We were this group of people who knew one another. We were a hamlet, a village, and it was just bad form to be selling things. Although in those early days there were bands who come out and play, and in their experience, then they'd set up bars, because that was like, they were used to getting paid from the bar clubs. Right? Except that they do that and nobody would buy their booze because everybody had come prepared to survive, which meant that everyone had a superabundance of booze. And then one day a guy showed up, and even he intuitively knew it was bad for him. He was selling firecrackers and fires. But even he sensed that, because he went out away from the center of the settlement and then sort of sold on the side. And we saw that and thought, that's bad form. They just felt it struck us such a discordant note. So we stopped the commerce, and then we turned around, and I recommend a book to anyone. Lewis Hine, a wonderful man, wrote a book called The Gift. And that personally inspired me, and that helped all of us to think together about the power of a gift and what that can do and how that can condition your relationship with others if you understand it. In fact, I think that's a very deep philosophy that can come out of it. You think that all being is a gift. And I don't know about supreme beings, but I think being is supreme, and I think it's a gift. Look at life that way, and it'll give you a spiritual power.
So eventually the guy with a trailer load of fireworks started giving them away.
Really?
I have two quick things I want to say about that. One, as someone, as a journalist who's written about it and a participant, I'm called upon to sort of explain Burning Man to the world a lot. And I find that the gift economy idea is one of the most difficult ones to get across to people who've never been there. They kind of keep turning it to barter in their mind. Like, so you barter, so to that extent, I think you're absolutely right that it's a core part of the experience that you have to experience to fully understand. Secondarily, and I think Michael talks about this in the book, the reason it works, which is kind of interesting, is of course, because as Larry just indicated, because we are creating an economy of superabundance out there by being encouraged to be self-sufficient and to bring everything we need. So it really Michael talks a bit in the book about how it is sort of an experimental tableau for a hopeful future world in which, you know, nanobots are taking care of the problems of physical production for us. And Burning Man really is a world like that. It's a world where you have everything you need if you were sensible. You have more than everything you need. So what do you do when you don't have to do anything to survive? And that's the world that's being created at Burning Man. And to me, it's encouraging seeing what does happen in that artificially created world. Okay, ready for another? I'm going to go to the side here. You, sir.
So, following on that question, it strikes me that one of the more magical things to me that seems to have evolved piece by piece is essentially the suspension of the marketplace. And that's what's radically different about going out there than our default world. And I'm wondering how was it just arrived at as piecemeal like you were talking about, or did you kind of arrive at some philosophy?
I think he's sort of asking, like, did the notion that Congress was not welcome out there evolve, or was it sort of, you know, almost centrally planned as part of the experience?
A little bit of both. It wasn't as if we had some ideology about gift giving. We didn't. So we just sort of, it did occur as a result of experience. But on the other hand, Burning Man itself came out of a bohemian scene in San Francisco. And anybody who's ever hung around with artists, you know, if say a painter, you know, a painter, and you go to the studio and they've got their works all over the place, and you'll see this kind of behavior when you're looking at, and you're drawn to a painting. Now, a painter, that's like being around a parent, being drawn to the child, and they notice that. And in some sense, the act of creativity is an unconditional thing. And the way artists tend to look at their work in some ways is often like that. And it's not unknown that a painter says, you like it, take it. You know, that is a classic bohemian move. Company that was doing, it was up in the bohemian genre, never charged for an event. You know, and indeed the model was you may already be a member. So the idea is that everything was immediately and freely available. So it was this commonwealth of shared gifts, which is what made it so creative, because people were free to just bounce off one another. And so we did come out of that. And so that was the background of the culture we emerged from. And then in the desert, you know, it's interesting because we were just inventing a society anew. You know, so we were making all these foundational decisions, which is wonderful. You can still get that at Burning Man. You know, you go out and you make something in a context that's no context, so everything seems unconditionally real somehow. And your gift as a habitation of the world, as it wouldn't normally in everyday life. So yes, it did come from, but it came from lived experience. It came from pre-existing culture. It didn't come from ideology. It didn't come from some kind of theory about economic theory of man. No, nobody was thinking that way. It's the way we were living.
Hand inside and far back. Yes, you start again. Yeah.
Thanks. There's been a lot of people have a question, and I'd like to go ahead and ask it since we had a few on stage. The given this year's cargo felt painting the 50s iconography and Dutch that becoming pretty much the standard language of the fly in the last few years, you either concur or deny it, you either use an extraterrestrial.
He's asking if Larry and Michael can confirm or deny being extraterrestrials.
Michael should answer that question.
I've seen it. I've seen it. They're out there.
Way back in the back corner.
I have a question for Larry. Larry, earlier this year, you very ceremoniously tossed your hat into the crowd. It's that you were going to pick it up at the East Bay Cat Store. I'm wondering if that rumor can be confirmed.
I can hear her. She's asking about your hat, which you apparently ceremoniously tossed away at some event earlier this year. You're not wearing one now.
I still have mine. He threw his away.
And the conclusion?
Oh, there was a rumor on the internet on Facebook earlier this week that you were picking it up at an East Bay Cat Store. Is that true?
Rumor that you were going to replace your hat at some East Bay hat store. Is this true?
They know that. Well, I mean, it wasn't somebody swearing on hats for life. I wasn't addicted to that. I was attached to that originally because my father wore exactly that model of open-road Stetson, and I loved it. And I put it on my head when I first went to the desert because my son, who was very young, told me to do it. And so it meant a lot to me. And then one day in Germany, Marion and Goodell and I were doing Burning Man work and had a joining suite night on impulse. It was the impulse that let me wear it. First place on an impulse, walked into her room and tossed it on the bed. And I said, I think I may stop wearing it. It took me another year to finally go all the way. So I don't think I have anything left to prove to my dad. And so that's the story. I told somebody at the hat guys ratted me out because I haven't told anybody. That's really funny.
Okay, I think we need to start wrapping this up now.
Okay. And we are, someone who knows more, come and explain what's happening now. We kind of forget.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Reiser, and I'm the treasurer of the nonprofit Burning Man Project. And it is my great duty to give you our gratitude. This is a nonprofit organization, and all of your ticket money from this evening goes to help us further our work in the world. It is a new world for the Burning Man community where we are a nonprofit and actually welcoming your donations. And tonight you have done that beautifully, and we hope you will continue with us on this journey, which is going to take us to places we've never been before, right along with Michael. I truly want to thank Brian Doherty, who came up and is doing this as his gift to the Burning Man Project. His book is so awesome. When we drive to the playa, we make the newbie in the group read it aloud, and it's great. Truly, we do it every year. I recommend it. There are copies available in the lobby, and we'll have those for sale, and hopefully they'll be around to sign your books as well. Certainly, we want to thank the Burning Man founders, both in the audience and on the stage, and the whole Burning Man organization that has worked, Leanna, and the whole group of volunteers we've had tonight. Z-Space was also very generous in helping us use their space. It's pretty wonderful. This is the inaugural event of the Burning Man Project's Philosophical Center, and the premise of the Philosophical Center is to understand our history, to help us think about how we move forward. This is certainly a milestone for us. We hope you will help us think about how to move forward, speaking to us afterwards, communicating with us in all kinds of ways. We'll certainly be on the playa, but we're also in the